In August 2011, 6 armored Mercedes-Benz sedans crossed the Libyan border into Algeria. Inside were the most powerful women in Libya, fleeing a country in flames. One of them was 9 months pregnant. Another had just lost her husband and 2 children to airstrikes. Their patriarch, who had ruled Libya for 42 years, was still alive somewhere in the desert. Within weeks, he would be dead. And their lives would never be the same. Before Muammar Gaddafi became the face of Libya's revolution, before the palaces and the female bodyguards, there was a woman named Fatiha al-Nuri. She was a schoolteacher, educated, proper, from a respectable family. The marriage was arranged in 1968, just months before Gaddafi's coup would transform Libya forever. The union lasted only 6 months. Gaddafi himself admitted he never met Fatiha until their wedding day. This was tradition, he said, but she was not his dream. The relationship dissolved quickly, quietly, before most Libyans even knew it existed. Fatiha returned to her life, disappeared from the public eye, and became a footnote in history. No photographs of her remain in circulation. No interviews were ever given. She vanished so completely that by 2011, when the world turned its attention to Gaddafi's family, most people didn't even know she existed. But Fatiha had given Gaddafi one child, a son named Mohammed. Mohammed was different from his half-siblings. He didn't seek military glory or political power. He became the head of Libya's Olympic Committee and ran the country's telecommunications empire, quiet, reserved, avoiding the spotlight that his brothers seemed to crave. When the revolution came, Mohammed was one of the first to be captured by rebels who stormed the family compound in Tripoli. Reports claimed he'd been detained, that he was speaking with rebel leaders, trying to negotiate. Then, just as suddenly, he was gone. The rebels said he'd escaped, slipped away from house arrest with the help of loyalist fighters who still believed in the Gaddafi name. Mohammed fled west toward the Algerian border, joining the convoy of Mercedes-Benz sedans that would carry his stepmother, his half-sister, and his half-brother to safety. He crossed into Algeria on August 29, 2011, officially welcomed on humanitarian grounds by a government that would soon regret its decision. For Fatiha, watching from wherever she'd built her life after divorce, the fall must have been devastating. Her son, raised in privilege, commander of industries, now a fugitive. But unlike Safia Farkash and her children, Fatiha remained silent. No statements to the press, no appeals to the United Nations. She simply faded further into obscurity, leaving her son to navigate exile alone. Mohammed eventually settled in Oman, granted political asylum on the condition he never engage in political activity. He has no social media presence. He gives no interviews. Occasionally, UN reports mention his name when tracking the movements of sanctioned individuals, but otherwise, he might as well not exist. His mother, Fatiha, has disappeared so completely that it's unclear whether she's even alive. The first wife of Muammar Gaddafi became a ghost long before her ex-husband's regime collapsed. But the fate of the first wife pales in comparison to what awaited the second. In 1969, a young military officer named Muammar Gaddafi was hospitalized with appendicitis. His nurse was a woman named Safia Farkash from the Obidat tribe in eastern Libya. Some accounts say she was born in Beta. Others claim she was from Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, born to Hungarian parents during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The truth about her origins remains disputed to this day. What isn't disputed is that Gaddafi fell in love. He claimed it was love at first sight. She was beautiful, intelligent, and from a prominent tribal family. They married in 1970, and she would remain his wife for the next 41 years, until his violent end in October 2011. Safia gave Gaddafi 7 biological children and helped raise 2 adopted ones. She was the power behind the throne, the quiet force managing a sprawling household and navigating the treacherous waters of Libyan politics. Unlike her predecessor, Safia embraced her role. She attended state functions, traveled with her husband, and used her position to build considerable personal wealth. She owned Burak Air, Libya's airline that held a monopoly on transporting pilgrims to Mecca for Hajj. The business made her extraordinarily rich. For decades, Safia maintained a low profile. She didn't give interviews or make political statements. She raised her children in the Bab al-Azizia compound, a fortified military base in southern Tripoli that served as both home and fortress. The family lived in luxury behind concrete walls and armed guards, insulated from the poverty that gripped much of Libya. The compound was a world unto itself, sprawling grounds with gardens, swimming pools, and multiple residences, underground bunkers built to withstand airstrikes, security systems that rivaled military installations. The family employed hundreds of staff: cooks, cleaners, gardeners, drivers, bodyguards. Safia managed this empire with quiet efficiency, ensuring her children wanted for nothing. Her business ventures made her independently wealthy, beyond even her husband's considerable resources. Every pilgrim flying from Libya to Mecca for Hajj had to use her airline. It was a license to print money, backed by her husband's political power, and enforced by a government that answered to him. Safia also invested in real estate, both in Libya and abroad. Properties in London, Paris, Dubai, accounts in Swiss banks, jewelry, artwork, luxury cars. The exact extent of her wealth was never fully documented, but estimates placed it in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She had become one of the richest women in Africa, without ever holding an official government position. This wealth created a buffer between Safia and ordinary Libyans. She traveled in armored convoys. She shopped in private boutiques, where stores were cleared before her arrival. She attended state functions draped in designer clothes and expensive jewelry. When the revolution came, many Libyans who'd lived in poverty for decades saw Safia as a symbol of the regime's corruption and excess. Then came 2011. The Arab Spring reached Libya in February. Protests erupted in Benghazi. Gaddafi responded with brutal force, deploying his military against civilians. NATO intervened. The country descended into civil war, and Safia watched as everything she'd built for 40 years began to crumble. The first blow came in April. On April 30th, NATO conducted an airstrike on a house in Tripoli's Garshur neighborhood. The target was Safia's son, Saif al-Arab, 29 years old, the quietest of her children. He died instantly. 3 of Safia's grandchildren died with him. NATO claimed they were targeting military infrastructure. Safia buried her son and grandchildren, while her husband ranted about revenge and martyrdom. Less than 3 months later, it happened again. On July 26th, another NATO airstrike hit the Gaddafi compound. This time, the target was Ahmed al-Gaddafi al-Qasi, the husband of Safia's only daughter, Aisha. Ahmed was a military colonel, a cousin of Gaddafi's, and a high-value target. He was killed in the bombing. Another of Safia's grandchildren died with him. Aisha, pregnant with her 4th child, survived. By August, the family's fortress was no longer safe. Rebel forces were closing in on Tripoli. The Bab al-Azizia compound, which had protected them for decades, was about to fall. Safia made the decision to flee. She gathered her daughter Aisha, her sons Mohammed and Hannibal, and as many grandchildren as she could carry. They loaded into armored Mercedes sedans in the pre-dawn hours of August 29, 2011, and drove west toward Algeria. The convoy crossed the border at Ghadames, a remote desert town in southwestern Libya. The Algerian government, caught off guard, initially denied the crossing had occurred. Then, faced with evidence, they admitted it. Safia Farkash, her daughter, and 2 of her sons had entered Algeria and were requesting asylum on humanitarian grounds. Aisha was in labor. She needed medical care immediately. The Algerian government allowed them to stay. Libya's National Transitional Council was furious. They called it an act of aggression. They demanded extradition. Algeria refused. The family was confined to a villa in Staweli, a suburb of Algiers, cut off from outside communication. Aisha gave birth to a baby girl on August 30th in the city of Janet. She named her Safia Janet, after her mother and the city where she was born. The villa in Staweli became their prison. Armed guards watched the perimeter, officially for their protection, but effectively to ensure they stayed put. Phone lines were monitored. Internet access was restricted. The Algerian government didn't want them communicating with Gaddafi loyalists still fighting in Libya or making inflammatory statements to the international press. Inside the villa, the family struggled with their new reality. Aisha was trying to recover from childbirth while grieving her husband and children. Safia was attempting to hold together a traumatized family while processing her own losses. Mohammed and Hannibal, men who'd grown up with unlimited power and resources, found themselves confined and powerless. The grandchildren, some barely old enough to understand what was happening, cried for their father and siblings who weren't coming back. They had money, at least in theory. Safia's personal wealth was substantial, but it was all frozen by international sanctions. They couldn't access bank accounts. They couldn't transfer funds. They were entirely dependent on the hospitality of the Algerian government, which was growing increasingly uncomfortable with their presence. Safia was now a widow, though she didn't know it yet. Her husband was still alive, hiding in his hometown of Sirte, planning his next move. She couldn't contact him. She couldn't return to Libya. She was trapped in a foreign country with her traumatized children and grandchildren, waiting for news that would never be good. On October 20th, 2011, rebel fighters captured Muammar Gaddafi in Sirte. He was beaten, dragged through the streets, and killed. His son Mutassim, who had been with him, was also killed. Their bodies were put on display in a meat locker in Misrata for 4 days before being buried in a secret location in the desert. Safia's husband and another of her sons were dead. She had lost 3 children in total: Saif al-Arab, Khamis, and Mutassim. Multiple grandchildren had been killed. Her daughter was a widow. Her remaining sons were scattered, imprisoned, or in hiding. And she was confined to a villa in Algeria, unable to even claim her husband's body for proper burial. She did the only thing she could. She wrote letters. In October 2013, on the 2nd anniversary of Gaddafi's death, Safia published an open letter to the United Nations, the European Union, and the African Union. She demanded they help her locate her husband's remains and those of her son, Mutassim. She wanted to bury them according to Islamic tradition. She called them martyrs. She asked the international community to investigate their deaths. She pleaded for contact with her son, Saif al-Islam, who was being held in the mountain city of Zintan, isolated from all family members. The letter was published on Voice of Russia Radio's website. In it, Safia described her husband and son's final hours as she understood them from media reports and witness accounts. They had been captured alive, beaten by rebel fighters, paraded through streets, then killed. Their bodies were displayed in a meat locker in Misrata for 4 days while people came to take photographs and celebrate. This violated every principle of Islamic burial, which requires the deceased to be interred quickly and with dignity. Safia also demanded information about what had happened to her sons Khamis and Saif al-Arab. Where were their bodies? Had they received proper burials? Who was responsible for their deaths? She wanted investigations, accountability, answers. She wanted the African Union, which Gaddafi had supported financially for decades, to stand up for his family now. No one responded. The letter went largely ignored by international media. The organizations she addressed issued no public statements. The bodies of Muammar and Mutassim Gaddafi remained in their secret desert grave. Safia had no recourse, no leverage, no power to compel anyone to act. She was a widow in exile, sanctioned and isolated, unable to even fulfill the basic religious duty of burying her dead. The UN had frozen Safia's overseas assets in 2011. An estimated £18 billion in state and personal funds were locked away, inaccessible. The Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates froze her accounts in 2012 under UN Security Council Resolution 1970, which targeted Libyan officials accused of violence against civilians. She was wealthy on paper, but couldn't access a cent. Life in Algeria became increasingly difficult. Safia's daughter Aisha began making inflammatory public statements. She appeared on Syrian television calling the new Libyan government traitors. She urged Libyans to revolt. She praised the Irish Republican Army and compared the NATO intervention to colonialism. The Algerian government, embarrassed, told the family to remain silent or leave. Aisha reportedly set fire to her safe house multiple times. She blamed Algeria for her problems. The final straw came when she allegedly burned a portrait of Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The Algerian government had had enough. In October 2012, Safia, Aisha, Mohammed, and other family members were quietly moved out of Algeria. They were granted political asylum in Oman, a small Gulf nation willing to take them on one strict condition: no political activity whatsoever. Safia disappeared into exile. She was occasionally mentioned in UN reports tracking sanctioned individuals. In 2016, the Libyan government, attempting to pacify Gaddafi loyalists, announced that Safia could return to Libya. She tried. She was refused entry at the border and sent back to Oman. In January 2024, the UN Security Council lifted the travel ban on Safia, though her assets remained frozen. She was no longer considered a threat to international peace and security. She could travel, at least in theory, though where she would go remained unclear. As of 2025, Safia Farkash is believed to split her time between Oman and Egypt. She is 73 years old. She has lost 3 sons and a son-in-law to violence. Multiple grandchildren are dead. Her husband's body remains in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Libyan desert. Her remaining children are scattered across the Middle East and North Africa, unable to gather even once in the 14 years since the regime fell. But Safia's suffering, profound as it was, still pales in comparison to what her daughter endured. Aisha Gaddafi was born on December 25, 1976. She was her father's only biological daughter, and he doted on her. The Arab press called her the Claudia Schiffer of North Africa because of her dyed blonde hair and glamorous appearance. She studied law at the Sorbonne in Paris. She trained with the Libyan military and achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel. She joined the defense team for Saddam Hussein when he was put on trial in Iraq. She was appointed a UN Goodwill Ambassador. On the surface, Aisha had everything: wealth, education, status, influence. She married Ahmed al-Gaddafi al-Qasi in 2006, a cousin and a military colonel. They had 3 children together. The wedding was held in Tripoli with international dignitaries in attendance, a lavish affair that reportedly cost millions. Aisha wore a custom gown and emerged from the ceremony as one of the most powerful women in Libya. She used that power in ways that sometimes surprised people. Unlike her mother, who stayed behind the scenes, Aisha courted international attention. She gave speeches at Speaker's Corner in London's Hyde Park, supporting the Irish Republican Army and other liberation movements. She traveled to Baghdad before the 2003 invasion to meet with Saddam Hussein. She joined Saddam's legal defense team when he was put on trial, arguing that Western powers had no right to judge a sovereign leader. These weren't popular positions in the West, but they made Aisha a hero to many in the Arab world, who saw her as brave and principled. She was young, beautiful, educated, and willing to challenge American and European hegemony. She represented a new generation of Arab women who refused to be silent or submissive. But behind the public image, Aisha's life was more complicated. She was close to her father, perhaps too close. She defended him publicly, even when his actions were indefensible. When protests erupted in Libya in February 2011, Aisha appeared on television denouncing the demonstrators as traitors and foreign agents. She gave a speech at the Bab al-Azizia compound on the 25th anniversary of the 1986 American raid that had allegedly killed her adopted sister. She compared the NATO intervention to Italian colonization and vowed that Libyans would never surrender. These statements made her a target. When NATO began targeting regime figures, Aisha's name was on the list. She was sanctioned by the United Nations and the European Union. Her assets were frozen. Her ability to travel was restricted. She had become, in the eyes of the international community, complicit in her father's crimes. Then 2011 arrived. Aisha lost her first child in April when NATO bombed the house where her brother Saif al-Arab was staying. One of her young children was killed in the strike along with her brother and other family members. She was pregnant with her 4th child at the time. 3 months later, another NATO airstrike targeted the family compound. This time, her husband Ahmed was killed. Another of her children died in the bombing. Aisha, still pregnant, survived again. In the span of 3 months, she had lost a brother, her husband, and 2 of her 3 children. She was 24 years old. As Tripoli fell to rebel forces in August, Aisha was 9 months pregnant and trying to care for her one surviving child while grieving losses that would have destroyed most people. The family made the decision to flee. They left behind their homes, their possessions, everything they'd ever known. On August 22nd, rebels captured Aisha's house in the Battle of Tripoli. Among the items they found was a golden sofa shaped like a mermaid with Aisha's face, designed by an Egyptian artist. It became a symbol of the regime's excess. Aisha crossed into Algeria on August 29th, traveling in the convoy with her mother and brothers. Hours after arriving, she went into labor. She gave birth to a baby girl on August 30th in the city of Janet. She named the baby Safia Janet. It was her fourth child and second surviving child. Born in exile, born to a mother who had just lost everything. Aisha did not grieve quietly. While confined to the villa in Algeria, she made fiery public statements. She appeared on television denouncing the new Libyan authorities. She called them traitors and agents of Western imperialism. She compared NATO's intervention to the Italian colonization of Libya in 1911, when her great-grandfather had been killed in an air raid. She supported the IRA, the Iraqi insurgency, and anyone who fought against Western powers. The Algerian government was mortified. They had granted humanitarian asylum, not a platform for political revolution. They asked Aisha to remain silent. She refused. Reports emerged that she was setting fires in her safe house, that she was unstable, that she blamed Algeria for failing to protect her family. When the family was moved to Oman in 2012, Aisha went with them, but exile didn't quiet her rage. She hired lawyers to petition the International Criminal Court. She wanted investigations into her father's death, into NATO's bombings, into the new Libyan government. She demanded that her brother Saif al-Islam receive a fair trial. She wanted the world to acknowledge that her family had been wronged. The courts dismissed her petitions. The European Union had placed Aisha on a sanctions list in February 2011, freezing her assets and banning her from entering EU countries. She fought the designation for years. In 2017, the EU General Court finally ruled in her favor, acknowledging that she no longer posed a threat to international peace and security. The travel ban was lifted. The asset freeze remained. Aisha was free to travel, but had no money and nowhere to go. Reports in 2017 suggested she had left Oman and was living in Amman, Jordan. Other reports placed her back in Oman. Some claimed she was in Egypt. The truth is difficult to verify because Aisha has largely disappeared from public view. She occasionally appears at art exhibitions in Oman, where she displays her paintings. In October 2024, Russia's State Museum of Oriental Art exhibited her artwork. The paintings, from what little has been reported about them, reflect a woman trying to process trauma through creative expression. Abstract works, landscapes, portraits. Nothing overtly political, nothing that would violate her asylum conditions in Oman, just a woman painting, trying to find meaning and purpose in a life that had been shattered. Aisha's surviving children are being raised far from Libya, in a country where they don't speak the native language and have no cultural connection. They attend international schools in Muscat. They have never known the wealth and privilege their mother grew up with. They carry a name that is both famous and infamous, marked by a grandfather they never met, and a father who was killed when they were too young to remember. For Aisha herself, the years in Oman must be a strange kind of purgatory. She is free in the technical sense, no longer imprisoned, able to move within the country, able to raise her children. But she is also trapped. She cannot return to Libya without facing potential arrest, or worse. She cannot access her frozen wealth. She cannot engage in the political activism that once defined her. She is frozen in time, a 48-year-old woman living on the charity of a foreign government, watching her children grow up in exile. The woman who once defended Saddam Hussein and challenged Western powers now lives quietly, painting in a small Gulf nation, trying to give her surviving children some semblance of normalcy. It is perhaps the cruelest fate of all, not death, but survival with everything that mattered taken away. But mostly, she lives in silence. A woman who lost her husband, 2 of her 4 children, 3 brothers, and her father in the span of 6 months. A woman who gave birth in exile and raised her surviving children in a foreign country, unable to return home. A woman who went from lieutenant colonel and UN Goodwill ambassador to a sanctioned exile surviving on the charity of a Gulf nation. In 2021, fake emails began circulating, claiming to be from Aisha. The scam emails asked recipients for help investing $27 million, promising substantial returns. It was a cruel irony. The real Aisha had no access to her frozen assets and was living a quiet life in Oman, while scammers used her name to defraud people around the world. The UN lifted sanctions on Aisha in 2023, removing her from travel ban lists while maintaining the asset freeze. She is 48 years old now. Her surviving children are teenagers. She has not set foot in Libya since August 2011. While Safia and Aisha fled to Algeria, other members of the family scattered in different directions or met violent ends. Muammar Gaddafi, Safia's sixth son, commanded the elite 32nd Brigade. He was known for brutal tactics and unwavering loyalty to his father. When the revolution came, Qamis led forces in Zliten and other cities, crushing dissent with overwhelming force. He became a symbol of the regime's violence. The International Criminal Court prepared an arrest warrant for crimes against humanity. On August 29, 2011, the same day his mother and sister fled to Algeria, Qamis was killed in a NATO airstrike near Tripoli. He was 28 years old. His body was never formally identified, and some Gaddafi loyalists claim he survived and is in hiding. But most evidence suggests he died that day in August, another of Safia's sons lost to the war. Saadi Gaddafi, the third son, was different from his brothers. He wanted to be a professional footballer. He invested in Italian soccer teams. He played briefly for Juventus Turin and other clubs, though his career was marred by a doping scandal in 2007. He accumulated less than 30 minutes of professional playtime across his entire career. When the revolution came, Saadi fled to Niger. The Nigerian government later extradited him back to Libya, where he was imprisoned and charged with killing football coach Bashir al-Rayani and crimes during the uprising. In 2018, a Libyan court acquitted Saadi of the murder charges. He was released from prison in 2021 and immediately left Libya for Turkey, where he remains today. He is 51 years old, living in Istanbul, keeping a low profile. Occasionally, he posts on social media about Libyan politics, expressing hope for national elections and stability. But he has no real political influence and no desire to return to Libya permanently. Muammar Gaddafi, the fifth son, was notorious for his violent behavior long before the revolution. He attacked police officers in Italy in 2001. He was arrested for drunk driving in Paris in 2004. In 2005, he assaulted his girlfriend in Paris, leading to his arrest. But the incident that defined him occurred in Switzerland in 2008. Hannibal and his wife, Lebanese model Aline Scoff, were staying at a luxury hotel in Geneva. They were arrested for assaulting two domestic employees. The incident created a massive diplomatic crisis between Libya and Switzerland. Gaddafi's government retaliated by arresting Swiss businessmen in Libya, cutting oil supplies, and withdrawing billions from Swiss banks. It was a glimpse of the regime's vindictiveness and Hannibal's sense of entitlement. When the revolution came, Hannibal fled to Algeria with his mother and siblings. But he didn't stay. In 2015, he tried to sneak into Lebanon to join his wife. Lebanese authorities arrested him immediately. He was charged with withholding information about the 1978 disappearance of prominent Shia cleric Musa Sadr, who vanished during a visit to Libya. The case is politically sensitive in Lebanon, and Hannibal became a convenient target. For nearly a decade, Hannibal sat in pretrial detention in Lebanon. No trial, no conviction, just imprisonment. Human rights organizations protested the indefinite detention. In January 2025, a Lebanese court finally ordered his release on $11 million bail. He was released but banned from traveling while investigations continued. His current status remains unclear. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is the only family member still seeking political power. He is the second son, educated in London, once positioned as the reformer who would modernize Libya. When the Arab Spring reached Libya, Saif al-Islam went on television and vowed to fight to the last bullet, promising rivers of blood if the protests continued. The speech destroyed his reputation as a reformer. He was captured in November 2011 by militia fighters in Zintan while trying to flee to Niger. A Tripoli court sentenced him to death in absentia in 2015 for crimes against humanity. The International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest. But the Zintan militia refused to hand him over to anyone. They held him for years, and in 2017, they announced he'd been released under an amnesty. Saif al-Islam vanished from public view. In 2021, he gave an interview to the New York Times from Zintan, claiming he was no longer a prisoner, and announcing plans to run for president in Libya's long-delayed elections. He expressed nostalgia for his father's era and criticized the chaos that followed. He said his former guards were now his friends. The presidential elections never happened. Libya remains divided between rival governments in Tripoli and Benghazi, each backed by foreign powers. Saif al-Islam reportedly moves between cities in southern Libya, maintaining influence among loyalist circles, but unable to translate that into real power. He is 52 years old, the last son of Muammar Gaddafi with any political ambitions. 14 years after Muammar Gaddafi's death, his family remains scattered and broken. Safia Farkash, the nurse who became a queen, lives in exile between Oman and Egypt, unable to return home or access her wealth. Her daughter Aisha, who lost 2 children and a husband in 3 months, lives quietly in Oman, painting and raising her surviving children far from the public eye. Mohammed, the forgotten eldest son, remains in Oman as well, so invisible that most people don't remember he exists. Saidi, the failed footballer, lives in Turkey. Hannibal, the troublemaker, was just released from detention in Lebanon after nearly a decade. Saif al-Islam, the would-be reformer turned warmonger, plots a political return from somewhere in southern Libya. 3 sons are dead, Mutasim, killed with his father in Sirte, Saif al-Arab, killed by a NATO airstrike, Khamis, killed leading troops in battle. Multiple grandchildren are dead. The family's fortune is frozen, their properties have been seized or destroyed. The compound in Bab al-Azizia, which housed them for decades, is a ruin. They have not gathered together even once since the fall of the regime. They cannot. Travel restrictions, political realities, and personal rifts keep them apart. The family that once ruled Libya with absolute power is now fragmented, powerless, living in different countries, unable to even mourn together. Think about what that means. A mother who cannot see all her surviving children at once. Siblings who haven't been in the same room in 14 years. Grandchildren who don't know their cousins. A family that once gathered for elaborate dinners in the Bab al-Azizia compound now scattered across Oman, Turkey, Lebanon, and Libya, prevented by sanctions and politics from reuniting. Safia has spent 14 years unable to physically embrace all her surviving sons simultaneously. When Saadi was released from prison in Libya in 2021, she couldn't fly there to greet him. When Hannibal sat in a Lebanese jail for nearly a decade, she couldn't visit. When Saif al-Islam emerged from captivity and started planning a political comeback, she couldn't advise or support him in person. This isolation is perhaps more painful than the material losses. The money, the mansions, the power, these can be rationalized away. But the inability to gather as a family, to support each other through grief, to present a united front against a world that despises them, this cuts deeper. Every birthday, every Eid, every anniversary of a death passes with the family separated. They communicate presumably through monitored phone lines and restricted internet connections. They see each other's faces through screens, but they cannot sit together, break bread together, weep together. The psychological toll of this enforced separation is impossible to quantify, but easy to imagine. Safia's request to recover her husband's body was never granted. Muammar Gaddafi remains buried in an unmarked grave in the Libyan desert, along with his son, Mutasim. The location is kept secret to prevent the site from becoming a shrine for loyalists. The wives of Muammar Gaddafi, Fatiha, who disappeared into obscurity, and Safia, who lost everything, represent 2 different trajectories of the same tragedy. Fatiha escaped by never being part of the story. Safia suffered by being at the center of it. In the end, both were left with nothing but memories of a regime that devoured its own. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.